Vamp, Neela, Fern, Sana, and Sarah stood in a tight circle, their eyes fixed on the leather-bound tome. The cover was thick with dust, yet the title, The Betrayal Broken Heart, seemed to pulse under the dim light. The air in the room grew heavy, thickening until every breath felt like a struggle against an invisible weight. Vamp reached into his pocket and pulled out the jagged, glowing gem. It hummed with a low, rhythmic vibration. He pressed the stone firmly against the center of the cover. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the leather groaned. The pages began to ripple like the surface of a disturbed pond, turning liquid and translucent. A swirling vortex of light erupted from the center of the book, spinning faster and throwing shadows against the walls. One by one, they stepped into the blinding glow. The room vanished, replaced by the rush of wind. The sensation of falling stopped abruptly. Vamp hit solid ground first, his boots skidding on smooth, polished stone. He stumbled, catching Neela before she could collapse, and the others spilled out behind them in a heap. The air here was sharp, clean, and smelled faintly of blooming jasmine. They stood in the center of a sun-drenched town square. Cobblestone streets sparkled under a brilliant, cloudless sky, and the rhythmic chirping of birds echoed from the trees lining the plaza. Fern stood up, brushing dust from his palms, and looked around. The contrast to the dark, heavy room they had just left was nauseating. Sana walked toward the edge of the square, her hand hovering near her side, searching for a threat that did not seem to exist. Sarah looked up at the fountain, where water danced in the sunlight, casting rainbows against the stone. Everything appeared normal. There was a stillness in the way the wind moved through the leaves, a lack of genuine motion that set their nerves on edge. The peace shattered without warning. A man, Robert, rounded the corner of the fountain with a wide, expectant grin. He held a bouquet of lilies, his pace quick and rhythmic, his eyes fixed on a doorway ahead. He was clearly looking for his wife, Lucy. He turned the corner, ready to surprise her, but his smile vanished in an instant. He froze mid-stride. The lily slipped from his fingers, hitting the wet cobblestones with a dull thud. His gaze locked onto a doorway just a few yards away. Lucy was there, pressed against a stranger, her arms wrapped tightly around him in a desperate, intimate embrace. Robert stumbled backward, his breath hitching in a jagged gasp. His hands began to shake uncontrollably, the movement rattling his entire frame. The group watched from the deep shadows of an alleyway, their presence entirely unnoticed. They felt the air pressure in the square drop sharply. The ground beneath their feet gave a subtle, sickening lurch. The town's vibrant light flickered, dimming for a heartbeat as the reality began to tear apart. Robert turned away from the fountain, his movements stiff and mechanical. He walked toward the park, his gait uneven, dragging his feet across the gravel path. The group followed at a distance, their footsteps muffled by the sudden, unnatural stillness of the trees. Vamp moved ahead, stepping into Robert's path to block his progress. "Listen to us," Vamp said, reaching out to steady the man's shoulder. Robert did not stop. He did not even blink. He walked straight through the space where Vamp stood, his eyes fixed on a point miles beyond the horizon. Sana stepped forward, attempting to grab his arm, but her fingers passed through the air as if he were made of smoke. The park around them began to lose its color. The vibrant green of the grass faded into a dull, sickly gray, and the leaves on the trees curled and blackened. Robert continued his aimless trek, while the sky above the park began to fracture into jagged, dark lines that pulsed with a low, rhythmic thrumming. A sudden, discordant tolling of bells cut through the heavy air. A wedding procession snaked toward the town square, oblivious to the graying world. Sarah signaled the others to hold their ground while she veered toward the residence of Lucy's new partner. She found the house tucked behind a row of wilting hedges. She located a cellar door, the wood warped and damp. She kicked it open, the hinges screaming in protest. She descended into the pitch-black space, her flashlight beam cutting through the thick, stagnant air. The floor was uneven, slick with a strange, oily residue. She moved deeper, her boots crunching on loose stone. The light hit the center of the room. A massive, intricate sigil was etched deep into the foundation. glowing with a rhythmic, sickening violet light. It pulsed like a dying heart. With every beat, the cellar walls groaned. Dust rained from the ceiling as the ground beneath her feet began to vibrate. This was no mere symbol. It was a siphon, drawing the raw energy of betrayal. The entire structure of the house shuddered, the stone floor cracking outward from the sigil's center. She turned and sprinted back toward the stairs. Sarah burst into the town square, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The wedding procession had reached the altar, a floral arch standing stark against the graying sky. "Stop the ceremony!" she shouted, her voice cracking, but the officiant only raised a hand for silence. The groom turned to Lucy, his lips moving in a rehearsed vow. The ground beneath the altar groaned, a deep, tectonic sound that silenced the birds. Sarah lunged forward, but a jagged fissure ripped through the cobblestones. The earth groaned and buckled, sending the wedding guests stumbling into the dust. From the dark crack, a geyser of violet energy erupted, spiraling upward with a sound like tearing metal. The air turned freezing, thick with the scent of ozone and rot. The altar collapsed into the void, pulling the floral arrangements and the officiant's podium down with it. Panic ignited. Guests screamed, scrambling over one another to reach the edges of the square as the ground continued to fracture. The violet light intensified, casting long, distorted shadows. Sarah stood at the edge of the expanding crater, watching the violet light swallow the center of the square, realizing the ceremony had been the final anchor for the betrayal. From the violet depths of the fissure, figures surged upward. They were encased in heavy iron, their movements synchronized and unnatural. They drew blades that hummed with the same sickly energy as the portal. Vamp shouted a command, and the group fanned out. Fern struck first, slamming a palm against the ground to create a shockwave that sent the lead guard stumbling back. Sana and Neela moved in tandem, weaving through the iron-clad ranks, their strikes precise and lethal. The air grew heavy, the gravity of the void pulling at their limbs. A guard lunged for Sarah, but she parried. Around them, the cobblestones began to lift. The ground beneath the guards disintegrated, yet they did not fall. Vamp channeled the energy of the jagged gem, creating a shimmering barrier to deflect a barrage of dark projectiles. The team was being pushed back, step by agonizing step, toward the edge of the expanding crater. The ground beneath the groom crumbled, sending him sliding toward the violet maw. He clawed at the shifting debris, his eyes locked on Lucy. She was already drifting toward the center of the vortex, her body weightless, caught in the crushing pull of the abyss. Robert lunged forward, ignoring the debris pelting his skin, and caught her hand, their fingers locked. For a heartbeat, the chaos stilled. He pulled his knuckles white with the strain, desperate to drag her back to the solid earth. Then, his gaze dropped. He saw the ring on her finger, the symbol of the vow she had broken. The realization hit him with more force than the gravity itself. His grip slackened. The connection broke. Lucy shrieked as the vortex seized her, her form blurring and twisting until she was nothing more than a shadow. The portal flared, a blinding flash of violet that swallowed the square, the buildings, and the very air. The town groaned one final time. The ground beneath the group gave way, and they fell into a bottomless, suffocating void. The world turned black, and the prison finally closed its doors. The transition was not a fall, but a sudden, jarring stop. The group gasped, their lungs filling with the smell of pine needles and wood smoke. They lay sprawled on the grass of their original campsite, the familiar heat of the fire washing over them. A few feet away, Donna, Subaru, and Tina sat on logs, turning sticks over the flames. The sound of a marshmallow hitting the embers was the loudest thing in the world. Tina looked up, squinting through the smoke, and poked the fire with a long branch. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice casual, oblivious to the abyss they had just escaped. Nobody answered. Vamp sat up, his hands shaking, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out the jagged gem. It was cold. The glow was gone, the surface dull and lifeless. He turned it over in his palm, the sharp edges biting into his skin, but he felt nothing. "Neela," Fern, Sana, and Sarah remained on the ground, their eyes fixed on the flickering flames. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, far more real than the chaos of the town square. They looked at each other, searching for a sign that the others remembered. But there was only the steady, rhythmic crackle of the fire. The leather-bound book was gone. The portal was gone. Vamp closed his fist around the dead gem, his knuckles white, and stared into the fire until the embers began to fade.